Welcome to Greek for a Week. I'm glad that you're along with us this week. And this week we are looking at Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 through 18. So we are going to be diagramming this paragraph. We've been looking at it for the last couple of weeks now. And so we have reached the point where we're going to put everything together in a diagram and see how everything can, if you will, syntactically fit together, and then we'll go from there. Okay. You'll notice here at the first slide, again, I'm not going to walk back through the translation, but there's a hoste here with a vocative on the agapetoi, beloved. So that is in reference to verses 5 through 11. And if you remember, I talked through that back when we discussed verses 12 and 13. And again, I think this is the practical application then of the theological information presented in 5 through 11. So now we're going to get the benefits, the practical benefits of what Paul is saying for us then moving forward as we live our lives day to day. Of course, we have a gar clause here, which is the basis for what's being said here in verse 12. We have another imperative here in verse 14. Probably, I'll have to look at my diagram, but that's a purpose clause there in verse 15. And then a participle here. We'll note how that interacts with verse 15. Then a contrasting conjunction. And then finally, a few more imperatives that Paul provides for the Philippians. So let's move forward and we'll see how everything is laid out. All right, verse 12. So then, hoste, my beloved, he is saying here, just as you have obeyed always. And I put the kathos there as the basis. So this will be the basis for the command that's coming. He says, not as in my presence only, but, again, strong contrast, now much more in my absence. So Paul is saying, when I can't be there, what am I going to ask you to do? I'm going to ask you to continue to work out your salvation. You've already been obedient, he says, and this is the basis for this particular command here. Continue working out your salvation. How? With fear and trembling. That's a prepositional phrase. With fear and trembling. Now, basis again. What's the basis now for us to continue working out our salvation? And that is because God is the one who works. So I have a substantival participle, ha energon, in both to will and to work for his good pleasure. So he is the one that's working in. I think one of the commentaries mentioned that it's not so much that we are the ones doing the working, but God is also working in and through us, giving us the ability to then work out our salvation. Then he says in verse 14, another imperative, do everything. Again, how do I do that? Without grumbling and arguing. For what purpose? So this would be how, this would be why, or for what purpose, so that you may become, again, what kind of people? Blameless and pure, children of God, above reproach, but specifically above reproach amidst a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. So you appear as lights in the world is important. We'll talk about that on the next slide. Okay. Now, if we move forward here, there we go. Now, how do I appear as lights from verse 15? And there's our participle of means. By fixing my attention, or by fixing your attention on specifically the word of life. Okay. Again, purpose, or what's the goal? So that Paul, he says, I can boast on the day of Christ. What's the content then of that boasting? I can boast that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Okay, so that hati there is a hati of content. all right, which would tell me what the content then of the boasting is. But even if I am poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and service of your faith, he says, I will rejoice. And he will rejoice with all of you. Then we get to the same two concepts of rejoice and rejoice with you. So here Paul is using the first person here, using the first person singular, and this and here really is a de, and that de transitions or develops the argument to the point where now he's using the you plural there. You yourselves rejoice and rejoice with me, which is what Paul really is asking here in verse 18. All right, so what will it look like if I go ahead and preach or teach this particular section? Well, first of all, you want to obviously communicate that your audience should continue working out their salvation. How should they do that? And then why should they do that? Then he moves on to verse 14 and he says, I want you to do everything. Again, how? And then why? So you have our purpose clause there, so that we may appear as lights. And then what happens when we appear as lights? How do we do that? By fixing our attention on the word. And then he concludes there with two commands, and that's simply rejoice. Rejoice and rejoice with me. So I think these can be helpful. I should say these are 3 points with this particular outline might be helpful to then go ahead and preach verses 12 through 18 of chapter 2 of the book of Philippians. Well, trust you have a great week. Thank you for staying along with us. Next week, we're going to begin a paragraph that probably will be 19 through 24, probably looking at either verse 19 or 19 and 20. Have a great week.